Hello everyone. Today we are here to discuss about something which has and will always be an inevitable part of our lives. I am talking about stress. My name is Udita Sharma. I am Assistant Professor, Department of Psychology at BHOPAL School of Social Sciences. Today we will be discussing about stress. What does it mean exactly? What is the basic meaning of stress? Let us begin this journey with a quick overview of what all we will be discussing in this session. We will begin with trying to understand the meaning of stress, followed by the characteristics of stressful situation, then we will discuss the sources of stress, then symptoms of stress, and then finally we will try and understand what are the different types of stress that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. Let us begin by understanding the meaning of stress over here. The term stress originates from a Latin word stringere, which means to draw tight. To pull something beyond its capacity is what is the literal meaning of this term. If we were to define stress, it can be defined as physiological and psychological response to a perceived threat or challenge. Stress is always a response to a perceived threat or challenge. That goes with the basic definition of stress. Apart from that, if we were to explain stress further, it can be understood as a state of mental or emotional strain or tension that occurs in response to adverse or demanding circumstances. Whenever the situations are such that they exceed whatever our dealing capacity is, that is when we perceive a threat. That is when we acknowledge a situation or a circumstances or any life event as being stressful. Now, moving ahead and trying to understand what are the characteristics of stressful situations. When I say characteristics of a stressful situation, we basically mean that whatever stressful situations you are dealing with in your life at any given point of time, any stage of your life, it has to be arising out of one or other of these characteristics. So, let us take a look at those characteristics of stress. The first characteristic of a stressful situation can be life transition. That means one of the sources of stress originating in our life is life transition, which basically means passing from one stage of life to another stage of life. For example, beginning college after finishing your school, or getting settled into a marriage, changing your home, changing your school, or something very basic when the sections of students are shuffled. Suddenly when you go from 5th standard to 6th standards, the sections are shuffled. Even that signifies a life transition. So, whenever we go through any form of life transition, we are likely to face stress out of that situation. The second characteristic of a stressful situation is difficult timing, which basically means events that happen later or earlier in life than they are supposed to happen. For example, what do we mean by events happening later or earlier here? To think of it in terms of a real life situation, you may take an example of an individual who dropped out of education for some personal and family reasons, and now after taking a break from education for 10 to 15 years, the person is again trying to pick up his or her education somewhere in their 40s. 40s is generally not the age when you think of re-beginning your education, renewing your journey with education. That is not the age. We usually try and prefer to finish it earlier. Another example might be individuals or young girls who have to go through teenage pregnancies. That signifies another example of this thing. Bearing a child much earlier and in much unfavorable conditions than it ideally should have been, or the loss of a parent at a very young age. That is another example of difficult timing. You do not expect to lose your parent or your spouse at a certain young age, but if that happens, that signifies difficult timing, which becomes another characteristic of a stressful situation. The next characteristic can be ambiguity. Ambiguity basically means something which is very vague, hazy. So, ambiguous situation, when we say that a characteristic of a stressful situation is ambiguity, we talk about situations which lack clarity, situations where you do not know what the end result would be. For example, we are always very much stressful about what our performance in the examination will be. Will we be able to clear a certain competitive exam or not? Because the results are ambiguous, the results are not yet clear. A person who has just gone through a medical examination for some extensive disease will be very stressful, will be very nervous until and unless he or she gets to know the results, because the situation is ambiguous. They don't know what might come up in the results. So that is an example of an ambiguous situation. The next characteristic of a stressful situation can be low desirability. Low desirability basically means any circumstances, any situation in your life which is undesirable to most people in all senses. For example, at all cost, across cultures, across country, all of us would want to lead a healthy and happy life. But God forbid, if we have to encounter a situation wherein we are not keeping well, or we encounter a severe injury or accident, that is something which is always unwanted for all of us. Or losing somebody near and dear to you, that again is something nobody would want to happen to them. Or being a part of a natural calamity like landslide, flood, volcanic eruption, or losing your house, your property in any of such natural calamities is something which will always be disliked by us. So anything of that nature becomes another source for another characteristic for a stressful situation. The next and the final characteristic we would be discussing here is low controllability. Low controllability basically means circumstances which are out of your control. Either behaviorally or cognitively, you cannot mold or amend the result of those circumstances. That is what controllability means. For example, something very common, a phase we all go through, looking at your parents gradually aging, seeing their declining health. It is something we do not want to happen, nonetheless we cannot stop that from happening. Or low controllability can also mean that you cannot control the progression of a certain disease. You can try, but after a certain point of time, if the medical team does not allow, after a certain point of time we cannot we cannot contain a certain disease. That again signifies low controllability. Moving ahead in this discussion, let us discuss the frequent sources of stress. What kind of situations, or what are those sources from which stress arises in our day-to-day situations, or what are the common sources which manifest in different situations and become stress for us in our day-to-day lives. The first of such source can be frustration. If we were to define frustration, it can be defined or described as something that is occurring when goal-directed behavior of an individual is thwarted. Basically, when you have a goal in your head and you are trying to accomplish that goal, you are trying to reach that goal, and then there is some circumstances or a series of events which are not letting you attain your goal, that signifies frustration. The emotion that arises at that time signifies frustration. So, whenever we are stopped or hampered from attaining any of our goals, that becomes one major source of stress, and this source is manifested in several areas of your day-to-day life, be it completion of your notes, or piling up deadlines of your assignment submission, or you want to prepare for a certain competitive exam and clear it, but you are unable to do so. Years after years we are still facing failure in that particular exam. All of these things can lead to frustration. The next source of stress can be conflict of motives. When we talk about conflict in psychological terms, we are talking about situations which demand choosing of alternatives choosing between two or more alternatives. If we were to define conflict in psychological terms, it can be understood as a situation that demands choosing between alternatives and making a decision about them. That is what conflict in psychological terms means. And when I say that conflict of motive becomes a source of stress, we are saying that any situation wherein you have to choose between two alternatives, Those alternatives might be equally favorable or equally unfavorable, that depends on the situation, but whenever there has to be a situation of choosing between two alternatives, we will face stress. We are likely to face stress in that situation. The next source of stress can be pressure. If we were to understand pressure, it can be understood as demands from the environment, the responsibility, your social obligations, your commitments, as well as your internal and external expectations, the expectations you have from yourself as well as the expectations that others have from yourself. The compilation of all these things exert great degree of pressure on an individual, which again becomes a source of stress. Till now we have seen certain three broad category of sources, the general areas from where stress arises. Now let us look at these very specific and area wise sources of stress. When I talk about area wise sources of stress, we are looking at what areas of individual life, from what areas of individual life can these stress arise. One of the area of stressors arising can be your individual factors. Individual factors can be things like your financial status, your family issue, your personality, whether you are an individual of a very relaxed personality or you are somebody who is very easily restless, your stress tolerance level is very low, are you an individual of that kind? Stress might also arise from environmental factors, which talk about your political environment, the pollution status in your country, the peace and harmony in the society where you reside, the economic environment that is currently going on around you, and things of that sort would come under your environmental factors. Even factors like noise pollution, air pollution, heavy traffic, drilling, construction, constant construction activities, all those things could also be classified under environmental factors of stress. Then stress might also arise from organizational factors. Organizational factors of stress can be related to the pressure of job you have, your organizational structure, the interpersonal demands in your organization. For example, you are somebody who is not very comfortable in making conversation with individuals, in facing individuals again and again, but you are employed into a sector which requires exactly that. So, if that kind of conflict arises, again here is a conflict which we just discussed. If such kind of conflict arises, that becomes another source of stress. Then apart from that, another organizational factor of stress may be task and role demands. If there is a huge discrepancy between your skill set and what your organization demands, then again it can lead to a great level of stress for the individual. The kind of leadership you have in your organization can also determine the level of your stress, whether the leadership is effective or not, whether it is autocratic, democratic, what kind of leadership suits best to you and to your situation again determines the kind of stress. Apart from the individual factors of stress, there are certain things which differ from individual to individual. Those can also be considered as sources of stress, which can be things like your level of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your the belief in your ability to do something. So, if I am going through a stress and I am somebody with high self-efficacy, I will have this belief that even though currently I am in a stressful situation, I have the ability to move beyond this situation, I have the ability to overcome this situation. That indicates self-efficacy. Your locus of control might be another personality factor that determines whether or not or to what degree will you experience stress. Apart from that, your perception, your social support, how much can you rely on your family, on your friends, on your supervisors, on your colleagues? Do you think they would be there to support you, or you are not much comfortable around them? All of these things can also determine whether or not you will feel stress out of a particular situation, and if yes, to what degree will that stress be felt. Next, let us quickly take a look at the symptoms of stress. We will begin by discussing the physical symptoms of stress, which might include rapid pulse, high perspiration, shortness of breath, headache, indigestion, etc. All of us at some point of life or the other must have gone through these symptoms. For example, if you are somebody who has lot of stage fright, you might feel nervous before going to stage, your mouth might start becoming dry, your hands are trembling, your heart is beating fast, your hands are sweaty. All of these things indicate the physical symptoms of stress. Even if you are feeling nauseous just before writing an examination or just before delivering that speech in front of the entire assembly, that also can be a part of physical symptoms of stress. The next category of symptoms include the psychological symptoms. The psychological symptoms deal with your cognitive aspects majorly. So, these would include symptoms like racing thoughts, intrusive thoughts, absent-mindedness, irritability, etc. When there is a lot of pressure over you, lots of assignments piling up, deadlines approaching, exams coming up, those are the situations wherein we become very short tempered or we become agitated very easily. We tend to cry very easily, because those are all psychological symptoms of stress that we are going through. You cannot focus on one thing. For example, you know that tomorrow you have an exam. Still, rather than studying with a peaceful mind, you have constant influx of thought. You are thinking about different scenarios, you are thinking about what all topics are left to studied. You cannot control those intrusive thoughts. That indicates another psychological symptom of stress. The next category of symptoms are emotional symptoms of stress, which largely deal with the positive or negative effect, majorly because here we are talking about stress. So, we are more focusing on the negative effect of stress. So, symptoms like crying spells, mood swings, anger, heightened emotionality, in a fraction of seconds you will feel very happy, fraction of seconds you will feel very nervous, suddenly after a while you might feel very agitated, after another while you might feel overwhelmed with so many things to do in your list. All of these things indicate emotional symptoms of stress. Emotional symptoms largely deal with feeling sad, feeling low, and those kind of states of mind. The next category of symptoms are behavioral symptoms. Behavioral symptoms, how your body is outwardly showing these symptoms of stress. So, whenever we are nervous, if you start shaking your leg, or when you are into a deep thought you start biting your nails, all of these things indicate the behavioral symptoms of stress. Then becoming accident prone, you are so occupied, so engrossed in your thoughts that you do not realize that you might be hitting the corner of the table while you are walking past it, or you are so stressed that you can't sleep, or you are so stressed that you can't stop eating. You are indulging in stress eating, excessive eating, eating in large quantities and at very short durations. All of these can be signs of the behavioral symptoms of stress. Now that we have understood the symptoms of stress, let us look at the types of stress. Stress can basically be classified, broadly be classified in two methods. The first categorization defines, the first type of categorization of stress can be between eustress, new stress and distress. Let us take a look at what these three types of stress mean. Eustress is a positive type of stress that can be beneficial for an individual's performance and motivation. Yes, stress is not always negative. A basic, bare minimum, optimum amount of stress is necessary for us to function effectively and efficiently. If a person is totally free from stress, there is an absolute absence of stress, you won't feel any motivation, any need to do anything, any goal directed behavior. Stress, a bare minimum amount of stress is what motivates you to do a task. If we take a very basic and minimal example of the same, when the semester begins, we are very relaxed and laid back about the submission, about our studies, about the completion of our notes, because at that time you are extremely relaxed, there is no stress. But as the semester end approaches, we automatically start becoming more serious. What if you don't become serious even towards the end? You might not have the motivation to study at all. Your academics might suffer because of the same. So, that bare minimum amount of stress which motivates you to pursue a behavior, that is known as eustress. The next type of stress is new stress, NEU, new stress. This we can associate it with neutral. This is the kind of stress which is neither harmful nor very helpful. It is neither harmful nor very helpful to an individual's well-being. Types of the kind of stress you feel when your daily routine breaks for a day. For example, your daily routine is you get up, you go to college, you go back home and relax with your friends and then study for a while and done. Your day has finished over there. This is your daily routine, something which you have been following for years. What if one day you know that an interruption is coming in that daily routine? From now on, you won't be free from your college at say 2 p.m. rather you will have to continue till 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. That means for 2 days, 2 consecutive days, you will have to break your daily routine. Now, this might make you feel uncomfortable for a while, but it won't have a very long term negative consequence in your life. Eventually, the stress would resolve, which is why it is neither very positive for you nor very negative for you. So, we classify such situations under new stress. The last type of stress here is distress. Distress is the kind of stress we talk about in day to day life when we talk to our teachers or our friends and we say that we are under a lot of stress, I am feeling stressed out. We are talking about distress. This is the negative type of stress that can be harmful to the individual's well-being. This is the kind of stress you feel when you see that situations are getting overwhelming or the situation is getting very threatening or challenging for you. You are talking about distress. So, eustress is the positive kind of stress which motivates and energizes you to do something. New stress is neither positive nor negative for you, and distress is the kind of stress which is harmful, which arises when you see that a situation is very threatening or harmful for you. Finally, let us look at the second classification of types of stress. So, according to this classification, stress can be either acute stress or it may be chronic stress. Acute stress is a short term stress that occurs in response to an immediate threat or challenge. So, suddenly a new situation has come up or suddenly something very drastic has changed in your environment or in your life and it is giving stress which lasts only for a short term. That kind of stress would be acute stress. However, the kind of stress which is very prolonged, which is a long term stress and which occurs when an individual is exposed to an ongoing stressor or challenge, that kind of stress which is already added up to your existing stress plus it is long term, those are the characteristics of chronic stress. So, acute stress is short lived and it arises out of an immediate threat, and chronic stress is a very long term, it is a prolonged and ongoing kind of stress. So, these were the two basic types of classification of stress. In this lecture, we have reviewed and tried to understand the meaning of stress, the symptoms of stress and the types of stress. In the upcoming videos in this series, we will take ahead the journey of stress and try to understand the consequences of stress and how do we manage them. Stay tuned for more on the same topic. Thank you.